not normal that we're under these circumstances in a pub in central Manchester. But here we are, and we're with Richard George at the Bank Pub, central Manchester, 57 West Mosley Street. Thank you so much to the team here for letting us in before opening hours. Bit of a battle on the entry, just to try and fight off others desperate to get in for their sort of Christmas pint. So we certainly have early advantage here. Very much looking forward to having this chat. Richard, this is round 2 for us. First video podcast as well. We've both had haircuts. Thanks for doing it, mate.
Looks very nice.
It does.
So I'm envious of yours.
Yeah, no, it's, I think we go to the same barber. Yeah, clearly. It's great to have you on. We've got so much to discuss since last time. I don't know how long ago it was, potentially about a year ago or something.
About that.
Yeah. And things are changing incredibly rapidly. We are literally here. We're not going to make this political, even though we did find out the election result today. So nonetheless, I think it will be refreshing for people, hopefully. Might not get us to number 1 on the trending media charts as of today, but we'll certainly have a good time. We're going to get started with some quick fire questions, which last time we didn't do. So we're going to see how you get on, just try and make you sweat a little bit, just to get us in the mood here.
One was up.
So, all right, we're going to go straight to quick fire. First salary you ever made?
The first money I made, or first salary, the first money I made was my own software I used to write as a kid on BBC's Spectrums and Oryx. I used to sell them when I was a teenager in the Wirral.
That's nice.
But my first salary was as a barman in the Black Horse in Lower Eswell.
I bet you felt wealthier at the time as well when you started making that £20 a day or whatever.
It was just brilliant. So I was making about £25 a week selling software. And then I started I sort of lied about my age and started when I was 17, which I got caught out on my 18th birthday because my friends came in to buy me a drink and the manager goes, "Why are they all buying you a drink?" I was like,
First computer?
It was an Oryx 1, 6502 processor, fantastic little machine.
You've not still got one of those?
No. Actually, that's the first bought one. The first one was one I made myself, which was 8 toggle switches to set data or address at 9th, and then a commit button with 4K memory, which I built from a Tangerine. It was a Tangerine computer.
Amazing. Most memorable first day at a company? So
I spent a lot of time as a contractor, so I've been through a lot of different companies.
A lot of first days.
A lot of first days. I started one at a company called Orbital in Basingstoke, and I pulled up the car park and they got this massive mast because they did a lot of GSM testing in the early days, and the mast was surrounded by dead birds. So I sort of walked in and said, "Do you realise you've got all these dead birds around?" "Oh yeah, don't worry, it's normal."
Part of our culture, they're our office pets. Yeah.
Perhaps you should turn down the radio a bit.
A job you'd have done if you weren't doing the job you're doing now. Terribly articulated, but hopefully.
So I, even though I was writing software when I was a teenager, I was looking at other jobs, and 2 of the jobs I looked at was a hairdresser and being a fashion designer or making clothes.
Amazing.
Because I used to print up T-shirts and sell them and various other bits and pieces. But then I realised I could be a really bad software engineer and make money, but I'd have to be a really good fashion designer to make any money. So I figured I'd do software just in case.
Interesting. Most commonly asked question after people find out what you do for a living?
Normally, can you fix my computer? But my printer doesn't work.
Yeah. Which no one can fix, of course. They're impossible.
My normal suggestion is throw away the printer and buy a new one because it's cheaper. My granny's friends asked me which sofa manufacturer I worked for when they found out I did software.
Best advice you've ever received?
Be yourself. And it's really like corny and all the rest of it.
Right.
But I went through a really bad period. I've always lived with depression. During my early 40s, got really bad because I was trying to be someone I wasn't, trying to be a corporate person, and it's all the politics and the nastiness, and it just didn't do me any good. So it's just be yourself. The fact that you're not like other people is great. Just be yourself. Awesome. And that's what I tell everyone who I start with is don't try to copy other people. Work out who you are, and just, that's you. Learn, but accept who you are.
Yeah, I love it. So, describe yourself as a teenager.
Weird.
Should we just call it that?
Yeah. I wasn't exactly. I was in the 80s, so I liked to have different coloured hair and a bit of new romantic look and the floppy thing from my face and military jackets. Yeah. But very much sort of not in a gang, not really being, I was sort of, definitely just an offbeat, as they call it in America.
I like it. Describe yourself as a boss.
My position as a boss is to inspire and lead, but not to tell people how to solve problems because they're the person who knows.
Yeah.
So what I try to do is help, promote, encourage people. It's all about sort of bringing the best out of whoever you're working with, and it's the same whether you're the boss or whether they're your boss. It makes no difference. You have to work it out together. My advantage is I've got a lot of experience and I can help, but mine isn't to tell you how to do it. I definitely not command and control.
Yeah, it's an enabling, autonomous kind of environment.
Yeah. I like to say I try to liberate people from the processes that they're forced to live within.
Awesome. And last one on the quick fire. Most inspiring business / entrepreneur. So you can sort of say a company or an individual.
It's really interesting because this is dead boring. But two companies really stick out in mind. When I worked for Research in Motion doing the BlackBerry, and when I worked for Amazon, because Research in Motion really showed me how not to run a company. They had some really clever people, but they didn't really, When I went to Amazon, I was amazed by how such a big company had very clear principles, very clear ways of working, and they really allowed you just to go and do what you want. So even though I was in this massive organization, I felt so in control of what I could do and so encouraged. You sort of look at it and people say, well, we want to be like Amazon. They haven't got a clue because it really is just get the best out of the people who work for you.
Interesting. A lot of the things that we mentioned, that's the end of the quick fire, by the way. Mm-hmm. Well done.
Thank you.
A lot better than I would have. There we go. Got you warmed up now. It is cold outside, I suppose. So, I think a lot of the things that you were mentioning ultimately are relating back to the people, the cultural side of things, and that's where you seem to generate a lot of the ideas, inspiration. It comes back to that, doesn't it? I think it's collaboration, it's team, it's enabling, it's getting the best out of people. Has it kind of been a secondary thing to skills in a lot of ways, perhaps from what you might assume a successful technical career to be?
Very, very much so. I was geeky from a young age, as you might have noticed. I went into contracting because I wanted to write software. I build stuff, I make things. I've got a couple of model boats in building. I'm always doing something. And that was the thing that really got me going. In the early 2000s, I had a startup, which didn't start up. And at that point, it certainly hit me that it's not about the technology. It's not about how cool your ideas are. You can't actually get anything going unless people support you. It's not you. It's not technology. It's a team.
Yeah.
That really then got me thinking. Got me into BlackBerry about thinking about people and building up teams and building up. How do you actually move forward? How do you enable people to do cool things? Yeah. I got into Agile about 2006 because it really reflected my thinking at the time. It's all about putting something out. The last few jobs where I've been doing sort of transformation, you always start off coming in as technology, and people talking about APIs and microservices and all these technology things. And you have to, AWS, cloud, this, you have to rewind them. Actually, the technology is not important. Yeah. It's the people. It's how you get the most out of really clever people. And really, sort of my first half of my career is all about being geek. The second half of the career is ungeeking and becoming more about getting the best out of the people you work with.
I want to talk briefly just about some trends and some stories that I've been reading about recently. It's sort of irresistible, I suppose, to ignore everyone's talking about what's coming in 2020. But we're actually going to resist it because I can't remember what they're talking about that.
Thank you.
So there was a couple of things that I did find particularly interesting, and I thought, I'm only reading this because I think it was just an interesting point, and something that I've not really considered but has been mentioned recently, and it's about age discrimination within tech. I think it's just a fascinating topic. I think there's reasons as to why perhaps it's happening, but I also think that we've got it wrong dramatically, and I think there's a lot of examples out there of businesses where I think we still perhaps are undervaluing experience. So I'll read this briefly, so I do apologise for sort of reading off script, but so this was mentioned that some sort of 41% of IT and technical workers have witnessed age discrimination in the workplace, 32% fear to losing their roles because of ageism. And this is some research that some of the bigger like job boards and recruitment companies have actually dug into. So curious about you. Obviously, you've had kind of an extended career. You've done tremendously well. I think from the conversations we have, it's clear that you've been motivated by reinventing yourself and change. But is this a real thing? What's your kind of take on this as a subject?
So I think we're in a bit of a funny position where, because I'm in the Gen X group,
right.
There's not really that many of us, so my first half of my career was very much dominated by a lot of people older than me, and the second half has been sort of, you're seeing a lot of people younger than me coming through, so I'm sort of sitting in the middle, like the middle of an hourglass. And there is, among a lot of the younger people, a feeling that older people have let them down, which I think in many respects is actually a warranted belief, and that's sort of that's already starting. But I think a lot of people get too comfortable in what they're doing. You've mentioned about reinventing and by looking at these technologies, by looking at how you can improve, you can keep yourself relevant. A lot of older people don't keep themselves relevant. They get used to certain ways of working. You see a lot of command and control. A lot of older people who let's outsource it, or in the last few years, there's been increased respect for the engineers, the people who are actually doing the job. You don't see that sort of respect in perhaps some older people where they're thinking we need project managers, or we've got to go into architecture, rather than respecting it. So I think there's problems on both sides. When you're actually working in a company that you're actually focused on cooperation, you don't. I haven't actually seen it. I have seen ageism absolutely where people have simply said, he's over 50, he can't do the job because he's a PLC called program. How is he ever going to learn Java? Right. So I definitely have seen it, but I think it's a result of bad behaviours on both sides.
Yeah, and there needs to be some commonality, because I think that I would assume that it's pointed towards this sort of startup generation, right, that seems to be emerging, and I think that by nature of people who are building startups, they're younger. Right, I mean, you're in a better position to build a startup when you have less responsibilities.
Absolutely.
You've got a big mortgage, kids, all the rest of it. So it kind of makes a lot of sense that that's the way forward. But do you think that there is ignorance there in people assuming that, devalued experience? I think that it's more present now than it's ever been.
I think there's devaluing experience, absolutely.
Yeah.
But there's also the self-fulfilling prophecy of if you aren't going to embrace, if you aren't, then you're going to be seen as a barrier. The biggest fear I have is somebody seeing me as a barrier for success.
Right.
And that's one of the big motivators is people come up with great ideas. And yes, we've got a large population of younger people, 35 and younger, with really great ideas. Naturally digital in many ways, and they've got the freedom to be excited and exciting. Well, let's encourage it, let's work with it. But too many times I've seen people who are older, my age or older, being very negative about that. They have no experience, what do they know about it?
Right.
And therefore, I think while yes, people don't necessarily recognise experience as valuable, it's what sort of experience you're giving. So if I'm sitting there going, well, I used to write C, then Java, and you don't know what you kids are doing, and your JavaScript's rubbish, and who cares about Go? I'm not actually helping in any way. So my experience isn't building forward. And I think that's probably the biggest thing I'd give to anybody who's my age or older is think about how your experience builds on what is new rather than trying to tell what is new that it's no good because something in the past was better. So I'd rather see people put effort into making themselves relevant.
Yeah, I know. I love that because I've always been about, what have you done? Plain and simple, right? It's not, time is kind of irrelevant. I think there's limits to that. Don't get me wrong. I think it's highly unlikely that if you're jumping around and you're doing less than 12 months here and there, you're likely not quite in there long enough to achieve things. But it's not to say that you aren't going into an operation or a business and actually being able to add value straight away. But it is about that execution. What have you actually done? And leading with that rather than leading with, I've been doing this 20 years, right? And vice versa. It's you're not, agile enough to change because of your age. I think that's ultimately where this conversation is coming from, is that way around rather than the other way. So it's interesting that you kind of...
You get to a point as well, you get to a point where the senior management, I was talking to Tim Franklin the other day in Manchester at a non-executive director's presentation he's doing with Doris IT, and it was a really interesting conversation because he was using terms about permafrost. So you got the board, then you got this permafrost of sort of older senior managers, and then you got the people underneath. And trying to get through that permafrost is actually a challenge because they're too far away from the new, the novel, to be useful in helping people grow. But and their focus is all about trying to promote themselves. And I think when you start looking at people bringing innovation in, it's often the permafrost of management that is the challenge to get innovation done. You want to change stuff. You want to make things better. You want to go to somebody, okay, well, let's not have architects and BAs and engineers and testers and product owners and agile team coaches. Why don't we just have a team with one person managing them all? Suddenly you're putting a lot of senior managers into a difficult position because you're saying, well, actually, maybe having someone in charge of BAs who doesn't do BA themselves, it's invaluable. So you're putting a lot of pressure onto the senior older people. I think that's where you then see problems in innovation. So it's not necessarily the people doing the work. Yeah. I've worked with innovative people who are in the 60s, who are in the 70s, in fact, really bright, because they're still doing the work, they're still hands-on. It's this permafrost of managers who don't see how they fit into the new agile model.
Interesting. Maybe gets us sort of nicely into something that you've been writing about recently, which is outcome-based work. So I'll let you kind of deliver the context on this because I'll undoubtedly butcher it if I try, and then we'll kind of get into that one. I think it's probably quite relevant to the discussion.
It's certainly because there's somebody's principle, I can never remember who talks about you export your organisation.
Yeah.
And the traditional organisation is one where you have high-level projects which get thought up at executive board level, and then you get split into various silos of, some architects looking at it, some BAs talking to the business, technology, IT is separate from business, and you always end up with a group of people who are just doing stuff without really context of why they're doing it. And probably the biggest flag of that is when you go into agile-like practices. So you go and use a backlog like Trello or Jira, and you've got epics, and these epics are technical epics. So they're talking about, implementing a storage thing or creating an API or creating a pipeline. But actually, they are irrelevant to the point of view of what you're trying to deliver to your customer. And this is sort of the big flag to tell you that what you're doing is not outcome-based. What you're doing is just doing work in the hope that you'll accidentally stumble on something that's valuable to your customer. So this is what got me thinking, because I was looking at my teams and I saw my teams all working very hard. We had architects working very hard, the BAs working hard, the engineers working hard, product owners working hard, and yet we weren't really delivering great stuff. we showed tickets moving and things got done, but we weren't delivering. Well, I couldn't see stuff coming out the other end.
Isn't that the classic sort of flaw of agile that you see when it's kind of done poorly, though?
Exactly. Right. So it's the classic. You can have everybody in favour. You could have the best agile environment. You could have the execs in empowering you, but it doesn't mean you're agile. Right. Because the key thing to agile is the number one line: preference of working software over good documentation and process. You've got to deliver something of value. And this got us thinking then. I was working with a great emerging talent in the PO world, Andrew Magic, who joined RS and was very keen on talking about what outcomes do you want to achieve. And this sort of got us thinking about, well, what do you mean by outcomes? What do you mean by, you're going to a team and say, I want something. What usually happens is the PO goes to a team and says, I want to redevelop the login page. And the team goes, okay, redevelop a login page, and you've got a new login page, but actually, has that solved anything? What's the problem you're solving? So we started to track back, and we started to challenge back on, what is the actual customer outcome you want? Because if you don't describe that, then how do you have any metrics for it? How do you know you've actually made a benefit? So that got us into a couple of forms of outcome where we're saying, okay, some things are you're required to do, the directive. So say you need to support PCI, or you need to support some regulation, Italian invoicing or whatever. These are things that you have to do, but it's still setting the question. It's not giving you an answer. And the other stuff which you want to experiment with. So how do I make conversions of my basket work really well? How do I improve people's findability of my products? So you've got sort of experimental outcomes and you've got directive outcomes. Both of them start off though with some sort of metric. What is it that you're trying to change? And outcomes have something for the customer, so the outcome for the customer, but it has a benefit to the company. There's no point doing loads and loads of work, making it a really great experience for the customer, if actually there's no benefit to the company, because the company in the end is a bank account that needs money to come into it. And, it means you have to understand your customer. If you look at a B2B company like an RS, where they have customers who come mainly through companies they're working for, there's not a lot of individual choice. At the company level, there's choice. A company goes, I want to work with this or that, but at the individual user level, they're sort of told to use. So really, it highlights the fact that you need to understand your customer, and all the way down to your engineer. All the way, it's not just your product owner understanding your customer, but your engineer, the person writing it, the guys who are doing your support models or whatever. If you have testers, those guys, they need to understand in detail who it is they're trying to satisfy. Lots of companies go into this persona idea, but they end up with a very thin persona. Women aged 25 to 45 who may have a child. I mean, that doesn't really help you define your customer. Steve Jobs once said you have to know your customer by the first name, and although it's people have said it many times, it really hits you in the face when you start talking about outcomes. Because you have to think about what it is the customer is going to get out of your work that benefits the company. And that's sort of the big, that really was sort of the big wet fish across the face. Because as we started to talk about what is it that we're trying to achieve, that drove us into smaller understandings of individual work. In Agile, we talk about epics, and we talk about stories, and we talk about tasks. And if you go, you can find 101 different definitions of what a story or a task or an epic is. Most companies go, we have this big project, let's make that an epic. And that epic could be months and months long. That doesn't really help us, because it's nebulous. It's not really anything that you can look at. If you say, okay, that's the project, what are the outcomes? And those outcomes become your epics. And you actually end up with smaller progressive things that you're building on. And that really worked. When we started then to go from, this is our outcome, a written outcome that the team agrees on, and then we started to drive our epics from that, we suddenly ended up with a much cleaner idea of what we're delivering. So rather than working for months on a project. We were doing 4 or 5 weeks of epic work that we could actually say, oh, look, we've delivered this. And in delivering this, we have gone from this metric baseline to this point, so we could attribute cost and value. And that really sort of excited the engineers to see better what they were working on.
Yeah. It's interesting. I mean, I mentioned I'm not going to go into trends, but certainly a trend for next year is personalisation. I mean, you know, it is in our space. You know, obviously we run a marketing division. That's it. I mean, everyone's looking for like something extra, but it's just the level of personalisation that we're going towards, and I think that sort of speaks volumes. It makes total sense, but I'm sure there's pushback, and my assumption is that where the pushback comes from perhaps is a little bit bureaucratic or political within an organisation as to why people wouldn't be motivated.
The pushback's actually interesting because a lot of the pushback came from engineering, which really surprised me. You can sell very easy to management, we're going to be working on outcomes. This is what we're delivering, because they can visualize it in terms of business. So it's a conversation with the business people, which is in language of business.
Yeah.
If you've got an epic though, what you need to do then is work out your stories. Again, not technical. You actually have to say, in order to deliver this, the user can go through this path, this path, this path, this path, which required you to think up front about what software you're going to write. And it's a classic thing. Everybody says, oh yeah, user stories. But if you don't actually work out your user stories, then when you start writing your code, you get stuck in that horrible loop of, I think I finished, no I haven't, I think I finished, no I haven't. You end up with a real mess.
Yeah.
But we got surprised by a number of engineers who went, oh, that's just bureaucracy.
Right.
We don't want to spend time writing stories. We just want to write code. So that actually was one of the places where we had surprise pushback.
Interesting. Yeah, I thought it would have come from there.
Yeah, because it's surprising how many engineers don't. I call it cowboy agile, where they get on a high level thing and then they just start coding, and that's great. But you do need to think about what you want to achieve. And it's not big things, it's not months of work, it's an afternoon with some post-its and a whiteboard. I mean, that's what we're talking about, the level of work. But still, it did surprise us how it was often at the engineering or a BA level where we saw pushback.
Interesting. I think we're going to have to leave it here. So anyone wants to read more on this, you wrote on it. Where is it? Where have you published it?
It's on Medium.
On your Medium.
It's on Medium. But also on my LinkedIn, there's a link to it.
Yeah. We'll put the link on the video.
Yeah,
Richard, thanks for doing this, mate.
It's a real pleasure. Nice talking to you.